whose wife will the woman be? Isn't that a great question? Now, the Sadducees were the oldest and probably most conservative of the major religious groups of Jesus' day. You know, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Zealots, and so forth. One of their big disagreements with the Pharisees and the other groups was over the fairly new notion that there would be a personal resurrection after death. The Sadducees denied this for a number of reasons, and in today's gospel, it talks about two of those. First, they argued that the resurrection was not attested in Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, which were the only books the Sadducees accepted. This is why Jesus uses the story about Moses and the burning bush as an argument against the Sadducees. That story, Jesus insists, implies a resurrection. And what's more, it's from Exodus, one of the books that the Sadducees did accept. That little discussion is a case of Jesus accepting the starting point of his opponents and arguing against them on that basis. Since we're not terribly concerned about what can and cannot be established using only the authority of the first 5 books of the Bible, this particular argument of the Sadducees, while it's interesting, is not something we really need to fight about today. The other reason, the other argument, is more to the point for us, I think. The Sadducees said that the resurrection didn't make sense. They said you could not think about it clearly, and you couldn't understand it well enough to merit believing it. This is what's behind the business with the woman and the 7 brothers. After all, if the idea of resurrection doesn't let you figure out as simple a point as who is married to whom, then there must be something wrong with the whole thing. That's an interesting argument for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that we still ask questions like this all the time. We don't usually ask them for the same reasons the Sadducees did, to discredit the whole idea of resurrection. We usually ask them in the hope of finding some sort of answer. But our questions are still very much like those of the Sadducees. We wonder whether in heaven, after the resurrection, babies who died as babies will still be babies, and whether those who die at great age will still be of great age. And if not, what age will they be? And for that matter, what age will we or anyone else be? By the way, in the 4th century, St. Augustine worked on this question and came up with an answer that satisfied him. He decided that everyone would be 33, which was generally thought to be Jesus' age at his resurrection. We also wonder whether we will recognize one another. And, at least in some cases, we wonder whether we will want to recognize one another. Or at least whether we will want to be recognized by everyone. No doubt there are also many who will still ask about some variation and versions of whose wife will she be or whose husband will he be, which could be connected with the issue of who we would want to recognize or not recognize and who we would want to recognize us. Did you ever wonder how many of those 7 brothers the woman in this gospel story really wanted to know forever? Anyway, there are lots of other questions like this around, and we all have them. What's more, they're good questions, and it would be really handy to have answers to them. It would be really great to have knowledge, real information about the details, the specifics of eternal life. Reasonably enough, we want to know what it will be like. This search for answers, for knowledge that feels so much like power, is both very ancient and completely contemporary. Crystal balls, mediums, books about near-death experiences, the old psychic channel from cable TV, all sorts of New Age stuff, and a goodly number of versions of Christianity have all promised and continue to promise this sort of information. They all say in one way or another, we know what it's like. We know the answers. We know the secrets. And it would be very nice to know, to have our questions answered, our doubts removed, and our uncertainties put to rest. So it's important to pay careful attention to what Jesus has to say to the Sadducees when they ask him about the woman with 7 husbands. After all, if we're going to get any reliable details about the hereafter, we will more likely get them from Jesus than from television psychics. Besides, this is one of the very few times Jesus does deal directly with these kinds of questions. And what Jesus has to say to the Sadducees is, I think, fascinating. He says that the woman in the story is not going to be anybody's wife. He said the question was silly because these things will be different and people will be different. He said that we'll all be like angels, children of the resurrection. He said, in effect, that God would handle things very efficiently. Now think about it. Is that a very satisfying answer? We don't know what the angels are like, so we don't know what it means, really, to say we will be like angels. We don't know what it looks like to be children of the resurrection. So that news doesn't help us much either. The Sadducees came to Jesus with this great question, and Jesus simply said that everything was going to be fine. But we know no more about what the resurrected life is like after his answer than we did before. Jesus just isn't telling. And, based on that, it seems to me that he doesn't particularly want us to spend a lot of time asking either. God can handle it. That's important to our understanding of the resurrection and of hope. It's important that we understand that our hope does not come from knowing whose wife the woman will be. Our hope does not come from knowing any details, not even from knowing answers to the best and most reasonable of questions. Our hope comes from knowing Jesus, and only from knowing Jesus. Our hope comes from our trust in the power and the love of God. There's no other source of real hope. Not only do we not know any of the details of the life to come, we're not ever going to know any of the details, at least not on this side of the journey. So we're called to hope, real, dynamic, living hope, based solely on our trust in God. We're given no specifics, no answers, no solutions, no picture postcards. Instead, we're called simply to surrender our difficulties and our logical puzzles and to trust that God will handle things better than we could even imagine, and that God's love and care for us will surpass all that we can ask or imagine. That hope, by the way, is especially important today. We're beginning an expanded season of Advent as we prepare to remember the time that God broke into the world in the form of the infant Jesus. But Advent is also the time when we prepare for the second coming of Jesus and our participation in that second coming. So, welcome to a season of renewed and increased hope and trust in the promise. On top of that, in a few minutes, we'll be welcoming 4 new members in the community of faith to share that hope. As we baptize Lillian, Olivia, Elliot, and Audrey, we'll be taking on the responsibility to share with them our own sense of confidence in the hope for the future that is the heart of Advent and the promise of today's gospel. We remember that, in the end, when we die and when those we love die, that God does not die. God's love for us, a love that has already carried us through so much, a love that has already been so gracious to us, that love does not die. That love will continue and that love will grow, and that love is what we have to rely on. One of the things this means is that the best way to prepare for the life to come is not by taking harp lessons or by trying to figure out the details of the afterlife. The best way to prepare ourselves for the life to come is to work on trusting God more and to practice letting go. This doesn't answer the question of the Sadducees or our own questions. We still don't know whose wife she will be, or how old we will be, or whom we will recognize, or anything like that. Instead, we're given an opportunity to trust. We're given an opportunity for hope that's greater than all of our questions, for hope that's greater than we can ever imagine. Amen.